There's a concerted effort to remake the world in ways that we've never seen, and this effort has an expiration date. That date is the year, right around the year 2030. Those changes not only involve the world around us, but they involve the world within us. The FDA in the United States has approved the first computer chip in the human brain that allows the brain to communicate with a hard drive on the computer with no keyboards, no cables. The company's called Neuralink. This is Elon Musk. A lot of people are familiar with this. And people say, okay, young kids, sweet. What's the problem? I can play Grand Theft Auto with no keyboard. Who wouldn't want that? Yeah, well, here's what they're not being told. This is not natural evolution. It is a form, it's a forced evolution, but it's not natural and it's not good for us, because to embrace that technology means that we relinquish our biology, we deny our divinity.
Gregg Braden, welcome on Just Tap In. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
Well, my brother Emilio, in this moment, I'm excited to be with you. I am excited to be on this broadcast. Just off camera, we said 2020 was the last time I had the honor and the privilege of being on your program, and we worked together. And it's a different world since 2020. This is also a holiday season, so I want to just begin by saying happy holidays to you and our viewers, your community, my family. I want to thank you for just everything you've done, Emilio, to perseverance. It's a lot easier not to do a podcast than it is to do a podcast. And you've stayed with it. You've grown this community, and community is more important now than ever because the world is moving in ways that we've never seen before. We need community. We need one another. And I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to be on this program today. It's unscripted. The truth is, you don't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know where we're going to go, and that's what makes it exciting. So I wanted to begin with those things. I think in terms of what is on my mind, front and foremost, we're in the process of releasing a new book. It will be physically released to the public in January, and this is mid-December. It is available now. People can pre-order it. The title of this book is called Pure Human: The Hidden Truth of Our Divinity, Power, and Destiny. And I'm excited about all my books. This one, I did something different, Emilio, than what I would typically do. I actually took 7 months out of my life, with a few rare exceptions for speaking commitments that were already in place. I stayed home and wrote this book. Typically, they happen in airplanes, airports, hotel rooms, and long road trips. And I felt like the content and the direction and the focus of this book warranted me taking the time to find just the right words and to put together the sequence of information in a way that would best honor our community, our global family. And I have to say, our publisher, Hay House, I really want to give them a shout out. They gave me tremendous latitude when it came to the edits. Very, very few edits. There were some grammar edits, and word usages and things like that, but they really got what this book is about and why I'm writing it, and what's behind it, the sense of graceful urgency surrounding this book, the urgency in the sense that we need to make changes in our world and our lives. The grace is that we have all the time we need. It's just if we're going to do it, now is the time to do it. And so they gave me a lot of freedom, even more than we've had in our previous books. And so that's a long answer to a short question. That's primarily what's on my mind right now.
Beautiful. And it takes a lot of commitment to be putting consistently out so many discoveries and so many new perspectives about humanity. You are a man with big questions that you've asked yourself since you were very little, and big answers have come about from that. So starting also with a big question, what does sovereignty mean to you? And why is it most at stake right now until 2030?
Well, to answer that question, I'm going to have to use a word that I didn't know we would get to it this quickly, and this is a perfect time. I'm going to use a word that has a lot of baggage for some people. I'm going to unpack that word and link it directly to the sovereignty that you're asking about. And that word is divinity, human divinity. This book, there are two parallel themes to this book. One is the concerted effort to deny human divinity. We're going to talk about what that means and why it's happening. And the other part of the book, the flip side, are the new discoveries that are telling us beyond any doubt that we are absolutely not what we've been told. We are so much more, Emilio, we're more probably than we've even allowed ourselves to even imagine, to dream that we are. And the science is telling us that this is true because science has discovered a new way to look at human biology, at DNA, at human potential, at human consciousness, rather than looking at it from the biology and the tissue perspective of the past. They are now looking at the human body and human consciousness from an IT perspective, information technology. And what they're finding is just a mind blower. So the book is two parallel themes. It's talking about both of these and what it means in our lives. So let me talk about divinity first. For a lot of people, the word divinity, they link it with religion. And religion means different things to different people. It can carry some baggage, maybe some misperceptions. For some people, hurt comes with that. The contemporary definition of divinity, though, and if people haven't heard this, I think they might be surprised. Divinity is defined as the ability to transcend perceived limitations. That's it. It has nothing to do with religion. I can see where religions would wrap their ideas around this human power to transcend perceived limitations. So let's break that down and unpack it a little bit. Transcend, I love this word, because it doesn't mean that we simply meet the challenges that life brings to our doorstep successfully. It goes beyond that. It means we become more than whatever it was that we were when we faced the challenge. Somehow that challenge elicits from us the best version of ourselves. So divinity is the ability to transcend, and this next part I really love, perceived limitations. The limits that we allow to define us in our lives may not even be real. They appear real to us because of the indoctrination, the programming, the conditioning. And those things come before we're even born into this world. They begin while we're in our mother's womb. We're chemically programmed for the way that our mother perceives life, her fears, her joys, her expectations. Those have chemical components for us. So when we talk about perceived limitations from our family, our friends, our education, obsolete science, religion, culture, society, peer pressure, all factor into the way that we see ourselves in the world. It's the story that we tell ourselves and believe about ourselves. So human divinity is the innate ability, and we were born with this. It's not something you need to strive for, or that you have to go to 1 million workshops or read 1 million books to receive. It is with us right now, and it is our ability to be the best version of ourselves. Let me just give some examples of expressions of divinity. Imagination is an expression of human divinity. Creativity, innovation, the ability to love without fear, forgiveness, healing, the ability to heal our bodies, to allow our bodies to do what they know how to do. empathy, sympathy, compassion, all of these human characteristics, these are all expressions of human divinity. And now I can answer your question. I equate divinity with sovereignty. We are sovereign beings when we are allowed to live the freedom of our divinity. And the reason this is important, and I want to go into this, there's a concerted effort in the world right now, not just in America, not just in Europe. This is a global effort to suppress human divinity by replacing us with technology. So AI, computer chips in the brain, RFID chips under the skin, chemicals in the blood, sensors in the body. And I want to talk about that. So I'm going to stop here just for a moment. I want to ask you if this makes sense. Does it make sense, the definition of divinity and how that can equate to sovereignty?
100%. And also what you're saying, what you've said before, also in the book, is that this divinity that we hold can only be accessed through our body. So this technology that you're saying is beginning to get infested into our body and merge with our body will inevitably take away that divinity if we allow it to.
It will. So I'm just going to, this is unscripted. We didn't talk about where we're going to go today. How deep do you want to go with this? Can we go deep, quick?
The deepest.
Well, I think I can see where the conversation's going. And to make sense of it, I'm going to back up about a half a step and let's develop a bigger picture, a context within which to view, a container within which to view this entire conversation with your permission. You okay if I do it that way?
Let's do it.
I think our viewers, I love your community because they're very well informed and they're also inquisitive. And you've got a global community. So the things I'm talking about are global things that are happening right now. I think everyone in our community knows, and our family, our global family, knows that this is not business as usual. Something very unusual, out of the ordinary is happening, and it's not their imagination. The world, there's a concerted effort to remake the world in ways that we've never seen. And this effort has an expiration date. It's got a timestamp on it. And that date is right around the year 2030 for a number of reasons. There are cosmological cycles that are converging. There are indigenous perspectives of time and space that are converging. There are proposals that have been put forth by powerful organizations in the world, ranging from the World Economic Forum to the United Nations to national policies. And we'll talk about why they're all converging on this year 2030. The only way to meet the goals that have been designed is for our world to become something very different than it is now. And for the first time in the history of humankind, the changes that are being proposed, and in some cases are being mandated by law, those changes not only involve the world around us, but they involve the world within us. The very nature of our genetic makeup, of our DNA, of our immune system, of our perceptions and the way our brain functions, have to be molded into something very different from what they are now in order to meet these goals. And for these reasons, we're seeing the pressure on the world and to make the changes in our lives. And it's coming about through really, really insidious ways. I mean, some of it is obvious and direct. A lot of it is done through very sexy marketing. I know it's happening, and I'm still in awe at how cool the marketing looks. And whether it's a YouTube commercial or whether it's a mainstream television commercial, they're showing a future with technology inside of our bodies, with blue sky and the birds are singing and people are smiling, and we're being told that we will be safer in the world, that we'll be healthier in the world, and that the world will be a better place, all we have to do is relinquish our sovereignty in exchange for these benefits, to relinquish our divinity, to give away the very facets of our humanness that we cherish as a species. And again, we're going to unpack all of this. So the big picture, why would this be happening? And I think it's important to identify this. So I don't want to dwell on it, but I think it's important to look at the big picture and then dive down into the nanosecond of our lives so that we can see where it fits into the big picture. So there's a million ways to go into this. I'm a scholar, I'm a scientist, I'm a scholar of ancient civilizations, ancient technologies, ancient languages. I've got a background in linguistics and the power of language. And I think the way I'd like to enter into this conversation, there was discovery made in 1946 in an area known as the Dead Sea in Israel. Qumran is the specific area. I know many of our viewers are familiar with this. 11 caves were discovered at that time. And by the way, they're still making discoveries. This isn't over yet. But the 11 caves were discovered. And in the caves were sealed jars, vases, clay vases, that contained the oldest records of the Old Testament that were unedited. And they pushed the dates back. These records were 1,000 years older than all the records that had been recognized previously. So for the first time, we had the opportunity to see the unedited versions of pretty much every book of the Old Testament. And you can't make this stuff up. This is the way it worked. And it was in the very first cave, in the first vase that came from the first cave, in the first scroll that came out of the first vase, that describes the context for this conversation that we're having today. The scroll was called the War, W-A-R, the War Scroll, about 19 columns of text. And in a nutshell, this scroll describes a battle that began before humankind ever emerged on this earth and has enveloped our history and our evolution since we emerged on this earth. The actual language in the text describes a battle between what is called the sons of darkness and the sons of light. We know that battle today is a battle between good and evil. Now, I've lost friends in my circles talking about this because it's an uncomfortable topic for some people, or they discount this altogether. I'll just say I was born and raised in the 1950s, 1960s, in the middle of the United States of America. It's a state called Missouri, in a rural community in northern Missouri. And when we talked about good and evil, Emilio, back then, it was kind of a joke. I remember high school, there was always a little red devil perched on your shoulder with a pitchfork and horns and a pointy tail. And there was an angel over here, and they're doing this. Should you, shouldn't you, better not, why not, have fun, And we joked about it a lot because that was our conditioning. What I want to say is evil is very real. It's not a metaphor. And evil plays out in ways that we don't always recognize. There are different forms of evil. And evil, the forces of evil, darkness, dark and light is the way a lot of New Thought people like to think of this. Those forces ebb and flow through history. Because we are approaching this 2030 end date, what you're seeing in the world are organizations, governments, corporations, people in positions of power. They are jockeying to be in the best place as we reach this end date. And to accomplish that jockeying, we are seeing evil rear its ugly head in ways that I've never seen I'm 70. I turned 70 this year. I've never seen it in my 70 years in this world. And it is often disguised insidiously. There is biological evil. There is technological evil. There is psychological evil playing out through the algorithms that mislead us on YouTube or Facebook or any internet kind of media, that mislead us into believing things that support certain narratives and agendas that are not good for us, but we believe them because of the way it's presented. That is a form of evil. There is kinetic evil, where armed forces, boots on the ground, fight and kill one another in the battlefields of Ukraine or in Gaza. That is kinetic evil. So there are many forms of evil that are playing out. And one of the expressions of evil, and I want to do this early on in this conversation, because evil is a nebulous topic. Even though we know it plays out in different ways, you know exactly what is evil. And I think we all need to have a benchmark so that when something crosses our path, we have something else to compare it to, a yardstick to say, is this truly evil? And so I'd like to honor our global community by giving them a tool to do that right now. What we can say as a benchmark for evil is anything that denies human divinity is an expression of evil. All right, so now let's unpack that. The definition: divinity is the ability to transcend perceived limitations. Divinity is expressed as imagination, creativity, innovation, the ability to love fearlessly, the ability to heal our bodies naturally, the ability to forgive one another without repercussions and consequences, the fear of what that forgiveness means. These are empathy, sympathy, compassion. These are all expressions of divinity. Anything that denies us access to or the expression of our divinity, we can say is a form of evil. And with that in mind, now we can begin to have this conversation and look at what it is that's happening in the world. The goal of the battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. The goal of the battle between good and evil is to deny humankind their divinity. Okay? That's the goal. In the old ways of thinking, we used to think of battles as forces fighting against forces. And that's the old way of thinking. That is obsolete in this deeply spiritual battle. Because if we engage force against force, that's what keeps us stuck in the hurt and the suffering in these ancient battles. The battle between good and evil is not a battle we want to win. We want to triumph. And I talk about this in the book. To triumph means that we live the best version of ourselves. We live our divinity, and by doing that, evil has not been allowed to deny us our divinity. So if the goal of the evil is to veil and deny our divinity, when we live the best versions of ourselves, we have triumphed without fighting. Now, maybe there's sometimes we have to fight, and we all know that. But the question, I think, for all of us on a deeply spiritual level is, as we go through these next 5 years, we're going to get through this. We'll get through it. And there'll be a time we look back on these years and we'll say, wow, what a crazy time that was. But the question is, Emilio, what do we allow these life challenges to make us into? What do we become in the presence of these challenges? Do we allow the events of the world to drive us into our most primal states of fear and revenge and hate for things that we don't like in the world? Or can we meet those challenges and meet them, if we have to push back from the love of what we know is possible rather than from the fear of what it is that we don't like, or the hate for what we don't like? These are deeply spiritual principles. So as we are now barreling down this road, 5 years isn't very long. We are all going to be inundated, strongly encouraged, in some cases mandated, to make changes in the world around us and the way we live, but also to accept changes into our bodies. How do we know if that's the right thing or the good thing? Now we have a benchmark. Do those changes enhance or deny our divinity? And then when we make the choices, it doesn't tell us what to do, but it tells us that consciously we're conscious of what we're giving away, what we're conceding, how much of our humanness, how much of our biology, how much of our natural abilities we're giving away. So I wanted to lay that context out. We don't have to talk about it a lot, but that is what's driving everything you see in the world. That's what's driving the hate behind elections. This year, this is the year 2024. At the end of the year, for the first time in recorded history, 40 nations had elections of their highest leaders, our highest elected office. That's never happened. And those 40 nations that were allowed free elections are pushing back on the authoritarianism, the centralization, the power, the control that is being levied upon them. Now, I'm not saying they know this, but what's happening is all those are the things that deny our divinity, deny our sovereignty, the authoritarianism, the power, the control, the centralization of power. And people know in their gut something's not right. It's not natural to live that way. And so they're pushing back through the elections. And that fundamental battle is what's driving everything in the financial markets, the banking sector, global economies, healthcare, elections, social change, the gender conversation, the Me Too movement, the Occupy movement, the hate between blacks and whites and Christians and Muslims and Jews and Muslims. These are all factors that are they're weaponizing the differences that can unite us, but they're weaponizing them into differences that separate us so that we become weak, vulnerable as a population to other people's ideas and other people's agendas so that they can meet those 2030 goals. So this fundamental battle, it's not like it's a peripheral conversation. It's front and center. It's just one that we don't always recognize. And when I talk about, I've lost a lot of credibility as a scientist. I have lost friends. I've lost business. And it's okay. It's okay because I'm not beholden. I'm blessed. I'm not beholden to anyone. I'm not beholden to a publisher or a corporation or anyone other than my own heart and my own soul, Emilio. And what I know is if I didn't share with my community what I felt would empower them while I am in this world at this time in history, something will be missing in my life. So I think that is my motivation. We're all motivated by different things. I love this world. I love the people of this world. And something's happening to us that we've never seen, and you're not going to see this in the mainstream. And for me, it's not about fear. It's about a celebration. So the book is a celebration of our humanness. And my goal in writing the book was to identify within the context of everything that we're talking about, we're such powerful beings and such beautifully articulate beings, given the abilities and given the no other form of life. My hope is that when the reader closes that book and walks away or goes to sleep at night or whenever they read, they have maybe a deeper appreciation for what it means to be human in a time when our humanness is being denigrated in our public schools and commercially. And maybe even one step further, beyond an appreciation, a sense of pride for our humanness, for their humanness. I'm proud to be a human. And the more I understand what it means to be human, the deeper that pride extends. And in that pride, that then becomes the motivation to care for and protect my humanness, my biology. in a world and during a time when we're being encouraged to give our biology away to technology. So I know I just said a lot and I talked a lot for a few minutes. I wanted to lay that out so now we can tie into it throughout the rest of the conversation. But I want people to know what the motivation is and why I've written what I've written. And we can go anywhere you want to go with this, Emilio. Thank you for the opportunity of saying all those words together. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you laid out a beautiful foundation for this conversation and the bigger conversation around what it means to be human. I would love to travel our point of consciousness now to Jerusalem, where the Shrine of the Book Museum is. And that's the place where the first 7 Dead Sea Scrolls that you mentioned are housed in this like circular bunker type of thing to be like ultra protected.
Have you been there? Have you been to the Shrine of the Book?
I've seen a lot of pictures, and I've heard you talk about it before.
Okay, we need a Gregg and Emilio field trip.
Let's do it. Let's do
That's
it.
what we need. Okay, I'm sorry, I interrupted. And so, where would you like to go with when we get to the Shrine of the Book?
So you said that the information of one of the scrolls, the Great Isaiah Scroll, will be the foundation of the new civilization that emerges and must be preserved at all costs. Why is the information within this such a big centerpiece around what we'll be creating in this new civilization that's emerging?
Well, I want to be clarity is very important. I did not say that was the value of the scroll. I shared that is the way that the scroll is viewed by the people in that part of the world. So, and you're absolutely correct. The first 7 scrolls that were discovered, originally those were called the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then over time, eventually 11 caves and over 3,500 fragments of these scrolls were found. They actually still found additional fragments in 2023 and in another cave. So this story isn't over yet. And what I didn't say, one of the things I didn't say, was that although those scrolls were discovered in 1946 and into 1947, the translations were not allowed to be shared with the public for 45 years. It wasn't until the year 1991, through the work of a man named Herschel Shanks, who almost single-handedly, and his team, headed up. I was a member of an organization called BAR, Biblical Archaeology Review. It was a publication, and they were funding a lot of research, archaeological. They still are a lot of archaeological research there, and it was through their efforts fighting the Vatican, fighting political opponents who had tremendous legal advantages and large sums of money, prevented them from sharing what was in those scrolls. So you have to ask the question, Emilio, here we are. At that time, it was the 20th century. What could possibly be in a 2,500-year-old text that would warrant that kind of time and energy and resource and money? And the answer is what we said earlier, the identification of the battle between good and evil. That was what the church didn't want out there, among other things. That was part of what the church didn't want out there because it gives a context to everything that's happening in the world. Without that context, it looks like things are just popping off for no reason. It looks like spontaneously the world is coming apart at the seams. War is happening here, war is happening there, economies are collapsing here, diseases are happening here, society's breaking down. And people say, isn't it weird that all these things are happening at the same time spontaneously? And it is not spontaneous. There's a structure and there's a process, and we're in the process. The only way out of it is to go through it. And these scrolls gave context to the process. So you can see a beginning and an end, and you can see a way out. And powers that be didn't want that out. So it took 45 years to free up that information. Now, your comment. And in Jerusalem, just outside of Jerusalem, is an amazing museum called the Shrine of the Book. And when you look at it on the outside, I know people have probably seen pictures of it, but they may not have known what they were seeing. It actually, you see two structures outside. You see a white, curved, very softly curved dome that actually mimics the lid of the jars that contain the scrolls. Okay, and that's very prominent. And then just off beside that, you see a solid black, it's an elongated wall. It's not an obelisk. It is a rectangular wall, solid black. And what that represents, the white represents the sons of light, and that black wall represents the sons of darkness. And this shrine contains the books that describe how we triumph. One of those scrolls, and it's the one that was the most complete of all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, is called the Great Isaiah Scroll. And when you see pictures of the Shrine of the Book Museum, in the center is, it looks like a Torah scroll, a vertical Torah scroll. And the entire Isaiah scroll is unfolded in a glass enclosure. You can walk around and look at every word of the Great Isaiah scroll. It is believed to be the most precious of all the documents. And now, to clarify your comment, the way this was built, this entire structure, that Torah scroll, massive Torah scroll, you have to climb up the stairs to stand next to it. That's how big it is. It is designed to drop underground, to retract and drop underground into a steel and concrete reinforced vault with doors that close over the top to protect that single document in the event of a nuclear attack where everything else is lost. Because the information in that scroll are the keys to the world that will triumph in the battle between good and evil. And one of the facets is that there is what the scroll identifies as a new Jerusalem that comes from a higher realm and settles on earth. It is a Jerusalem of peace for all nations and all religions. And it's a very, very powerful text. I just want people to know, for transparency, now I believe that scroll that we're actually seeing, the actual scroll, I think, is already in that vault. I think we're seeing a facsimile, but the actual scroll is already in that vault. So this is one way into the conversation. It's not the only way. But for those that are biblically inclined, or through the eyes of history, this gives a lens in terms of what we're talking about. I could talk about the Hopi, or I could talk about the Maya, and they would describe the same thing from a different perspective: the convergence of cycles of time and cosmological reasons, Earth's location in the ecliptic, and what it means in terms of the great central sun, the center of our Milky Way. And that's their perspective. So this is one of those places, Emilio, where, language, we're limited by language and the words that we use. So I'm assuming we're speaking largely to an English-speaking audience, and these are the English words and an English view through history. If we were speaking to an indigenous audience, I'd probably use different language and different themes to bring us to the same place. So all of this gives us that context. Now, within that context, what's going on? We are being encouraged to give our humanness, our biology, away to technology. We're being told for at least 4 generations, well, since World War II, public schools in the West have told young people that they are a flawed, F-L-A-W-E-D, flawed form of life. That all carbon life is flawed, and humans specifically are flawed. And because we're flawed, we need something outside of us to correct those flaws, we need a savior. And that savior is being touted as technology, artificial intelligence, computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, again, RFID chips under the skin, sensors, nanosensors running throughout the circulatory system. And we're being strongly encouraged to replace our own natural biology with those synthetic components. The problem with this, and what we're not being told, there's a very high price that comes with giving away our humanness. And that price is this: when you replace natural biology with synthetics, the abilities of that biology begin to atrophy, and pretty soon we lose them in one generation. And then epigenetically, it's passed to the next generation. So, for example, let me just give an example. There was the FDA in the United States has approved the first computer chip in the human brain that allows the brain to communicate with a hard drive on the computer with no keyboards, no cables. The company's called Neuralink. This is Elon Musk. A lot of people are familiar with this. And people say, okay, young kids, sweet. What's the problem? I can play Grand Theft Auto with no keyboard. Who wouldn't want that? Here's what they're not being told.
It's enticing.
Yeah, well, here's what they're not being told. There was, the thinking used to be that humans are born into this world with a finite number of brain cells. So when you're born, you have X number of brain cells, and everything you do, every beer you drink, you lose brain cells, and that used to be what they tell us in college. Don't drink the beer because you've only got so many brain cells, Now, new discoveries in the last 5 years tell us that that's not true, that there's a part of the brain called the hippocampus. And we are constantly creating new brain cells until the last breath of our lives. But there is a catch. And the catch is that if we do not engage the newly created brain cells in a meaningful way within about 7 days, within about a week, those brain cells will atrophy and die because they feel that they're not needed. Biology is an on-demand system, and we've all heard this: use it or lose it. So if a computer chip in the brain is providing the functions that the neurons in the brain would typically do, and we're not using those neurons, they begin to atrophy and die. That concept applies to the entire human body. It applies to how we use sex in our lives, our immune system. If something else is creating immunity for us, our immune system is weakened, and it believes the consciousness, if you will, or the intelligence of the immune system believes that it's not needed the way it was, and it begins to function very differently. And nobody's saying that to young people. So while we're being encouraged to replace our biology, what we're actually doing is we're giving away the gift of our humanness that allows us our divinity. Okay, and that's why I want to have that conversation first. It's only through our natural bodies that we can express those divine attributes, that we can express imagination, creativity, and love and forgiveness and empathy and sympathy and compassion. And when your body's not working and you're not feeling good, it's hard to be at our best. I think we all know that. So now you begin to see a bigger picture. We're being encouraged, and they're making it look really attractive. But we're being encouraged to give our humanness away for the first time because the technology is available to do that without being told of what the consequences of that really are. And by doing that, we lose our ability to access our divinity. That is a form of evil. Anything that denies or veils our access to divinity. So in a very real sense, relinquishing the gift of our humanness is a form of evil that is being normalized in our world today because people are accepting this without knowing the consequences.
Gregg, what were some of the ways that our ancient ancestors were speaking about, like the Hopi or the Mayans or the Egyptians? In what ways were they using their body as an instrument to create that connection with the divine and with a greater power bigger than themselves?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, where we're talking about the convergence of cycles, I have not studied every indigenous tradition on planet Earth. Every indigenous tradition that I have studied, there's a common theme, multiple common themes. And one of those themes is they all talk about the cycles of time, that this isn't a linear progression that began primitive and that we're the pinnacle of sophistication right now. Every indigenous tradition talks about previous, multiple, repeating cycles of time that began and ended in very specific ways. They ended through crisis and catastrophe. Some of them were natural, some of them were human created catastrophes. So they all talk about those. Let me just share a story from I don't live in Missouri any longer. I'm coming to you today from our studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's a high desert, the American desert Southwest. And not far from where I am, I'm surrounded by indigenous culture, a number of different ones: Hopi, Navajo, Pueblo, Apache, all very close to where we are right now. 1990, I was hiking through one of the archaeological sites in northwestern New Mexico. It's a very mysterious site called Chaco Canyon. It is now recognized as a United Nations World Heritage. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it is so unique. I was hiking on a remote trail, and an indigenous man was coming the opposite direction on the trail. And we met and we had a conversation. I had never met him before. I didn't know him. And he told me a story that relates to your question. And the story, I'll make it very brief. I talk about this in the book as well. He began the story by saying a long time ago, he said the people of that area lived very differently. They lived close to the earth. They remembered who they were. And something began to happen. And even the ancestors, the elders, they say, we don't know exactly why, but the people of the world became lost. They forgot who they were and they became lost. Now we see that parallel in biblical traditions and other traditions as well. So the indigenous man, he said the people of the earth became lost, and they so longed for the capabilities that they knew in their hearts were possible, but they didn't have them. They longed for their connection to the earth, with one another, with the cosmos, with nature, with sensuality. He said they began to build machines outside of their bodies that mimicked what their bodies used to do. And he said, we live in that world today. We continue to clutter our exterior world, our outside world, with artificial devices that copy and they mimic what we already do inside of our bodies, but we've forgotten how to do it. He said, we'll continue to clutter the world and it will become more and more messy, more and more complex until we remember who we are. And once we remember who we are, we let all of that stuff out there go, and we embrace the truth and develop the potential that we have within our bodies, and the world becomes a much simpler world. So we still have the capabilities, but we don't need the machines to do that. All right. So here's why that story is important for me. I'm a scientist. My primary degree is, I'm a geologist by degree, geophysics, with a strong background in computer science, math, physics, computer science, linguistics, and history, archaeology. And I focused more on the computer science end. I'm hesitating because I don't know how deep to go into the story, but it's
Very
interesting.
deep.
Well, I if it's relevant, I came up in the world as a geologist. It was interesting. It was during the 1970s, and for people in the West, some of you may remember this. It was the first time that oil had been cut off from the Middle East. Through most of our oil was coming out of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, Libya, places like that. And because of the tensions between the Middle East and what was happening in the West, they cut off our oil. Oil was rationed. I remember we had you were rationed to 10 gallons of gasoline per vehicle per week. And this was in a time when vehicles, they weren't built for efficiency. It was in a time where they're building what were called muscle cars. Beautiful, beautiful Pontiac GTOs and Ford Mustangs and Pontiac Firebirds and Camaros, and they didn't get very good miles. They got maybe 8 to 10 miles a gallon is what we were looking at. Huge engines, huge 4-barrel carburetors, and it was just a whole different world. And it was during that time that I was in college, and computers had just come into vogue. Emilio, it was really interesting. Prior to that time, computers were still in big rooms where you had these big, they were called magnetic tapes that used to run the computers, and I became proficient in a programming language that was called Fortran at that time. It was Fortran 4, and then it evolved to Fortran 77. And the computers were used in geology for the first time to map underneath the earth. We had been cut off from oil, and so we were applying this to the North Slope, Alaska, an area called Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. And so I developed more of a computer expertise than I was still working in geology and geophysics, subsurface mapping, faults and things like that, hydrocarbons, water tables, all of that. But the computer science facet took me even beyond being a geologist, and eventually it led me into, during the Cold War, into the defense industry. And I'm saying this because I had access to the most advanced technologies through projects like SDI, Star Wars Defense Initiative that I worked on, and space exploration and things like that. And I'm saying this because I saw the most advanced lasers, communications, radar systems. And to this day, Emilio, I have yet to see any of those technologies built outside of our bodies that doesn't mimic the principles that we already do inside of our bodies. To this day. And this is what the native man was telling me. The internet mimics the way that we communicate energetically with cells in our bodies and between one another. Here's one. A lot of people don't know this. Every successful transaction in our genome, in our DNA, in our species, is recorded in every cell of every body of every human that walks the earth. 8 billion people, 50 trillion cells per person. We all have a record of every successful genetic transaction. That record, it's distributed. It is transparent. If you know how, it's not hidden. If you know how to read stuff, it's right there. It is immutable, and it is secure. And if those terms sound familiar, they are the terms that describe the technology we're building outside of our bodies that is revolutionizing decentralized finance and the way information is stored. It's called blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is built to mimic the way that we store information inside of our bodies. Every one of our 50 trillion cells functions as a capacitor, as a resistor, as a transistor. We read photons of light coming into us. Light is information. We emit photons of light. We're talking to the world around us. We store information like a blockchain. Every cell in our body is a gated circuit with an input and an output, and we produce about 0.07 volts of electrical potential which is small. But then you do the math, 50 trillion times 0.7 volts, I believe it's about 3.5 trillion volts. Trillion volts of electrical potential in every one of us. Potential. If we could harness that and focus it for our own healing or for our intuition, deep states of intuition, super memory, super learning, super cognition, longevity, deeper immune response, greater resilience to the world around us, what would that mean? Well, we can and we do. But here's the beauty. One of the things I learned when I was in the defense industry is the more complex the systems are outside, behind the scenes, the simpler the user interface to reach those systems. Here's a perfect example. This my cell phone here. I can touch a picture on this cell phone and set into motion an entire cascade of events that I don't have any visibility to. I can pay my bills. I can communicate with my friends. I can start a blog. I can do all these. All I did was touch a picture. That is a very simple user interface for a very complex system. We work the same way. Our user interface is the core of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions. Our user interface is thought, feeling, emotion, breath, focus, movement, and nutrients. And through these are all epigenetic factors. Through combinations of these, we have access to this technologically advanced, highly sophisticated, soft technology that we call the human body. It's soft technology because it's not a hard technology of a computer chip or a wire or an RFID chip. We're more than that. We're neurons and cell membranes and ion potentials moving across the cell walls, and we self-regulate all that. And the beauty, Emilio, is we don't have to know any of it. You don't have to know any of the stuff I just said to benefit. I'm saying it because if people need a reason to think differently about themselves, there's no shortage of reasons. But I'm saying it, and this is the answer what the indigenous man was saying to me, was when we remember who we are, when we embrace this extraordinary potential within us, we have less of a need for the stuff out there because we are the technology that we're waiting for. And the world becomes much simpler. Now, this is important because so much of the technology that we're being asked or invited or mandated to take into our bodies, we meet, and in many cases, we exceed the potentials of that technology. And nobody's telling young people that. All they're telling young people is they're flawed, they need something, and they're idolizing AI, computer chips, all this computer chips in the brain, all this kind of thing. So that, again, is a long answer to a short question. From the indigenous perspectives, we haven't even begun to tap the deep truth of what it means to be human. We stand on the precipice of giving our humanness away. And once we do, it's gone forever. It's not like a little dial. You can't say, well, let's try this for a year, and if it doesn't work, let's go back. You can't do that because the human body morphs and adapts to that technology, and it no longer is what it was before the technology. There's nothing to go back to. So once we give our humanness away, we can't get it back. And we're about to give ourselves away before we even know what it truly means to be human. And that is a message in this book as well. By the way, the movement, there is a concerted effort to replace our biology with technology, and it has a name that also has a lot of baggage. The name is the Transhuman Movement. Trans simply means beyond, like transgender means beyond gender. Transhuman means beyond human. And the movement to bring technology inside of us means that we are now no longer purely human. And that's why I titled the book as I did, Pure Human, because the experts are telling us if we do not change the thinking and the trajectory that we're on within 5 years, they're saying right now we are probably the last generation of pure humans, that not just Earth, that the universe will ever know, unless there's humans somewhere else. Once we give our humanness away, we will be the last generation of pure humans. And I think it's sad. I think we're worth preserving. I think we certainly have our flaws, and we can improve on things. And I think that's why we're here. I don't. My personal opinion is, I was debating with a scientist recently who was trying to convince me that this is the next step in human evolution. And I said, no, this is not natural evolution. It is a form, it's a forced evolution, but it's not natural, and it's not good for us, because to embrace that technology means that we relinquish our biology, we deny our divinity. That's not good for us. Might be good for some other form of life. It's not good for us.
Yeah. So if we know that time is not linear, and that means that there is already an existing parallel reality of humanity that took different choices. I know you've studied before some accounts of people that have had abductions from advanced life forms. We could call them, aliens, for lack of a better word. And the consensus among these accounts is that the people that were abducted are saying that the advanced life forms are saying that they're here because we are at a point of evolution where they were, and they chose, between biology and their technology.
Yeah.
And in many cases, these could actually be future versions of us, which gets a little bit more complex. But it's like they're warning us as well of that potential that you've highlighted so clearly. What do you feel we can learn from these accounts and these abductions that people have experienced?
Well, we can learn what they share with us if we have the wisdom to listen, and if we can be open enough to accept what it is they're saying. So I'll begin to answer this question. In the 1990s, I was blessed to tour with some of the most amazing scientists, researchers, scholars the world has known up until that point. I was on the conference circuit with Michio Kaku, for example. You probably, if you don't know his name, I know people have seen him. He's a Japanese scientist, long white hair, physicist. Was one of the key players in the string theory world. John Mack, who I'm going to talk about in a moment, a Harvard-trained psychologist. Zecharia Sitchin, Edgar Mitchell, sixth man to walk on the moon. Ram Dass, before he left this world, and just some amazing, beautiful, brilliant. At that time, most of them were males that were on this circuit. And John Mack was one of those, and some people are familiar with his name, and some not. He was a Harvard-trained psychologist. He was the head of the psychiatry department at Harvard University at the time. And what put him on the map was he caught a lot of criticism and ridicule because he wanted to scientifically investigate the phenomenon that today we call alien abductions. So prior to John Mack's time, there had been alien abductions reported, and people were seeking help. And the official response was the people were crazy, that they were schizophrenic, they were hallucinating. And that's the way academia wanted to treat these abductions. John Mack said, hey, this isn't just America. It's happening all over the world. It's been happening for decades. Let's look at this from a scientific perspective. And if there's nothing there, cool, we'll drop it. If there is something there, we need to know. And he legitimized the study of the alien abductions, and he caught a lot of heat for that before his mysterious death. I had the privilege of knowing him, of touring with him, of having conversations with him. And what happened through his work and other studies, when you pull it all together, uh, different cultures of people, different age groups, different nations, different decades of time, when you pull them all together, there's common themes. And one of those themes is that when somebody's abducted, they do probably, I would do the same thing. They would say, why me? Why am I being abducted? And the answer fell into two categories that both have the same message. So one category, and you mentioned this, was that the abductors said they were truly aliens from another world far, far away who had come here because of what you mentioned, because we are at a point in our evolution that they were in theirs a long time ago. We're about to make a choice between biology and technology. They made the choice. They chose technology. It was a bad choice, and they want their biology back. So they're warning us not to make that choice, and they're also taking our DNA to try to reinvigorate some of the biology within their technology. So that's one category. Second category is similar, but I think it's even maybe more interesting, because these abductors said clearly they are not aliens from another world. Although they looked very different, they said they were humans from our future, the product of the choice that we're about to make to replace our biology with technology. So they have come back from a future time, number one, asking us not to give our biology away so that they don't have to become what they've become. Number two, they want our DNA in their time frame so that they can hopefully reinvigorate, splice back some of the humanness that they gave away long ago. Two different stories.
Would that change their future?
That changed their future, yeah. Two different stories, similar outcome, both encouraging us to protect and preserve the gift of our biology rather than relinquishing our biology for the efficiency and the speed of AI and computer chips. And I think both are fascinating, because this isn't like 5 years down there. This is happening right now. It's already happening. And it's happening so fast, we're not even aware of it. For example, Sweden is one of the European countries that is really moving quickly. And there was, to accept technology in their bodies, there was a commercial that I saw recently, and you have to kind of laugh when you see it, but it's actually very serious. Here's a guy, he's walking down the street. Sky is blue, the birds are singing, music's playing in the background. He doesn't have a briefcase, doesn't have any car keys, doesn't have a billfold, and he's saying he is freer than he's ever been. He has 15 separate RFID chips embedded into his body in different places. So he goes to the office and he swipes his wrist, RFID chip unlocks the door. Another one starts the car. Another one pays for the groceries on the scanner. Another one goes to the ATM. And it is being widely accepted. The RFID chips are being widely accepted. And that's just one example. One of the flaws that transhumanists have identified is sexual conception for a number of reasons. Number one, first of all, live birth is painful. It's bloody. It can endanger the life of the mother. And the truth is, we never know precisely what the outcome is. We don't know with precision what that conception is going to produce. Transhumanists say, hey, we'll fix all of that. We'll fix that because it's obsolete to use sex for conception. We can do it outside the body. We can engineer fast twitch muscles for athletic performance, or brain for IQ, higher IQ, eye color, hair color, all these things. And we now have artificial wombs. The FDA will approve them for human use within 5 years. They're already using them for other forms of life where they are conceived and planted into an artificial womb full term, and the nutrients in the womb allow them to, they're using lambs in this research because lambs, their blood and their brain function very, very similar to human blood and brain, and they're using them successfully. But I want to say something about all this. You know, Emilio, the technology is never good, bad, right, or wrong. It's the thinking underlying that technology. So, for example, an artificial womb could be a beautiful and blessed thing if a woman has given birth to a premature baby that cannot survive, and you can't put it back inside of her body. That baby may die. Now we have the technology for artificial wombs that may give life to that baby on a case-by-case basis. That can be a beautiful, beautiful thing. But you don't want that to become the way life comes into the world. There are energetic relationships between a mother and her child from the baby being in the womb, and listening to the heartbeat, the chemicals that they're sharing, the hormones that they're sharing, the epigenetics that they are sharing in the DNA. Computer chips in the brain are the same way. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. You know, if there is a serviceman or a servicewoman that's given their lives to defend their country in Afghanistan or Iraq or, you know, Yemen or wherever it is these days, Ukraine, and they lose arms and legs, and they come home, and with the high-tech prosthetics, they can now have arms and legs that they lost in battle that are communicated with through a chip in the brain. So now they've got a chip in the brain communicating with those prosthetics. They can hold their own babies in their arms. They can feed their own mouths. They can comb their own hair and brush their own teeth. Man, what a beautiful, beautiful thing. Who wouldn't want that? So it's not the technology. It's the thinking underlying the technology. Transhumanists, that movement, and the policies are already being written and laws are already proposed that computer chips be placed into the brains of newborns beginning the year 2030 to give them what they call the advantage to compete in business, in life. And there are already groups who say, you know, let's conceive out asexually outside the body, gene engineer our children to perfection. The question is, whose idea of perfection? You know, there's a whole conversation about what perfection, it changes over time. And then an artificial womb, if a human baby comes from an artificial womb, you can't even say it's born. It's not born. It's not coming through a vaginal birth. I don't know what you would say. We don't even have the words yet. But what they're missing on all of these is that we are more than soft, wet, sticky, gooey tissue and DNA. We're more than ones and zeros on a computer chip. There's a part of us that science is struggling to come to terms with that we call consciousness. And when we begin interfering, we know just enough to mess it up. We know just, yeah, we can engineer babies. It's been done. We've got these artificial wombs. What are we giving away? What are we compromising? How much of our humanness are we compromising if we begin embracing these things? And you're old enough now, Emilio, you've seen how quickly technology can spread once it's embraced. I mean, I'm still blown away. I remember when I was a kid, all of my music came from vinyl records and 8-track tapes, which were crazy engineering. And then we went to the cool world of cassette tapes. I still have my cassette collection. And then we went to CDs. I rented a car recently, a truck. I drive pickups mostly. I'd rented a pickup truck. It had a radio, but there was no CD player because they're obsolete. It's all digital now, and that has happened in a single lifetime. How quickly. I remember when nobody had cell phones, and now everybody has cell phones. I remember when no one had a handheld calculator when I was in school in the 70s, and all of a sudden everybody had handheld calculators. Once the technology is approved, it spreads like wildfire. And that is the concern. It's not about using these technologies case by case, for battlefield injuries or premature babies. It's about en masse changing. This is the way that we live. That's where we get into trouble as a species. There's a man, maybe you know this man, maybe you've interviewed him. His name is Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil, he is a futurist. He's a science fiction writer. Most people probably know him. He is director. I don't know his official title at this point. So I apologize, Ray Kurzweil, if you're watching this. He was director.
Subscribe first, Ray.
Yeah. Well, he was director of engineering at Google, of AI, artificial intelligence engineering. And he has come out with a book this year called The Singularity. What he says in that book, he's always been very accurate in his predictions. He predicted, for example, in the 90s, that computers would come in, or in the 80s, that computers would leave the office and come into the homes of individuals and be used for more than entertainment. Now every home's, got a computer. He predicted electric cars. He predicted cell phones before anybody even heard of a cell phone. And what he says, he is one of the ones that says, if we don't change our trajectory and the way we think, that within 5 years, there will be no more pure humans. And he said by the year 2045, that if we go this route, we will all be enmeshed in this digital internet of all things, where everything on the face of the earth is digitally represented. All the animals and all the jungles. We have the technology. We can assign a digital ID to every giraffe and every elephant. We can assign digital IDs to fish, to every fish, because we've got the technology to scan and do to every tree and every forest, every human, every facet of our lives, what we consume, where we travel to, what our preferences are in life, our biometrics, not just our heartbeat and our galvanic skin response and our blood sugar and glucose levels, but our emotional response. When we see something, a proposal is flashed in front of us to change our lives, to follow a new law, and we say, okay, we'll do that with our words, but our heartbeat and our emotional response will say that we really don't want that. And the most intimate details of our innermost life all become part of this massive database that's run by a massive AI that's already being developed. And the networking to make that happen is already being developed. It's already being implemented. It's already in place. So Ray Kurzweil says if we don't change our thinking, this is the world that we're headed to within our lifetimes. And it's only possible if we give away our divinity. It's only possible if we relinquish our biology, if we lose the appreciation and the respect for the gift. And it is a gift of our bodies, because the science tells us we're not the product of Darwin's idea of evolution, random mutations. We appeared suddenly 200,000 years ago. We had a series of mutations that cannot happen naturally. They won't happen by themselves. There was some kind of intervention, like the splicing of chromosomes for human chromosome 2. I talk about in the book, I've got all kinds of videos on that. Chromosome 7 makes it possible for us to speak like complex speech and singing. I joke about it. I'm a musician when I'm not doing what I'm doing now. And I joke about this sometimes because chimpanzees share 98% of all of our DNA. Only 2% separates us from a chimpanzee. That's a mind blower, And then you ask the question, if we have that much in common, why can't a chimpanzee sing? And you'll never hear a chimpanzee sing Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. And the question is why? Chromosome 7 is the reason. We had a mutation that happened to no other primates. It happened exactly 200,000 years ago when we appeared, when chromosome 2 was spliced. So as a scientist, what I have to say, I don't know. I have my suspicions and I have my theories. But scientifically, I cannot say with certainty what happened. What I can say is that there's strong evidence for an intervention of some kind. There was an intervention that gave us the mutations for the neocortex, the ability for empathy, sympathy, compassion, mirror neurons, and our divinity. And so I have to say that our divinity is a gift. And when we're looking at all the things that we're talking about, this is the goal of evil, to deny the gift of our divinity. We're still alive. We simply have given away what's called human agency. Agency is the ability to choose, to make the choices of forgiveness. It is a choice to love. It is a choice to forgive. It is a choice to express our empathy and our sympathy. And that is why I'm hoping through this book that the reader develops a deeper appreciation for what it means to be human, and maybe that sense of pride. And I'm looking, I know we're coming up close to the end of our conversation here, I think. But one of the things, let's see, 11, yeah, I do have another interview. But I think I want to acknowledge to anyone that might be listening, we've covered so much ground today. I've shared a lot of information. I want to acknowledge for many people, I know it's a way different way of thinking. I was never taught to think this way. In my upbringing, and as a scientist, I had to break through my conditioning and allow myself to cross traditional boundaries that have separated, geology from biology, from chemistry, from physics, from genetics, from history and linguistics. We're taught to keep them in the boxes so we can study them, but you're never going to get anywhere in terms of a deeper understanding until we cross the boundaries that separate those ideas. And I recognize that is a leap. And I appreciate everyone. If you're still with us, thank you for that. And what I want to say is that really, I have offered a number of reasons if you want to think differently about yourself, but the beauty is you don't have to know anything of what I've just shared. For me, what we're up against, it all comes down to love. Bottom line is love. And the question is simply, do we love ourselves enough to accept the gift of our humanness and our divinity? And the answer to that question, it's not words, it's the way we live our lives. Because every moment of every day, literally every moment of every day, we make choices. We choose to either affirm or deny life in our bodies. We affirm or deny our divinity through the way that we speak to one another, the words that we use, and the way we allow people to speak to us, through the way we nourish our bodies, what we give ourselves as nutrition, and the way we see the world around us. A divinity is where we find our power in this world. Divinity frees us from fear. And when we are free from fear, I'm going to go back to the first question you asked me, that is where we embrace our sovereignty. We're sovereign beings when we live fearlessly. We love fearlessly. And when we understand who we are, it erases a lot of the reasons for the fear. Fear typically comes from not knowing. And once we begin to accept the truth of our humanness, I think a lot of those fears pale in comparison to the power and the beauty and the sacredness and the good that we can do in the world. And that's really, I think, where we are in life. And I'm hoping this book is a guide for anyone on that journey to help them feel better and make healthier choices for themselves and their families.
Yeah. Gregg, I keep coming back to the soul for some reason.
Sure.
As you're talking, I keep the word soul, soul, soul. And one thing I've learned is that the soul is eternal. If humanity goes down this path, let's say the one that we're highlighting as like maybe a path to self or a path of negativity where we lose our divinity, what happens then to the soul?
Divinity and soul I believe, are very closely related. The qualities that we identify as divine, again, all the things, our ability to imagine, to innovate, to create, the ability to share ideas with one another, that is an expression of divinity. When that sharing is denied, that is a form of evil. So when we are denied the expression of our divinity, or when access is veiled, it's always there because it's a part of us, but it can be veiled. The soul is still there as well. The soul doesn't have the opportunity for the expression. I think it's a trauma to the soul to be denied the expression of these characteristics, these qualities, these traits that we cherish. And I also know the soul is very resilient. Certainly, the soul will recover from all of that. But we're in this world right now, and you think about this. It's so interesting. We're in this world. It's only through our biology that we can express all of these divine attributes. If you don't have a body in this world, how do you express your imagination, your creativity, your innovation, your love, your forgiveness? And for this reason, our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions have always revered the human body. One of the common themes as an archaeologist, when I've studied ancient civilizations from Egypt to Greece to, wherever they are, all through Africa, even into South America, when external temples are built, the temples are built in layers. And in the innermost sanctum is where the deepest secrets and the greatest mysteries are preserved. And it has a name in most of these traditions. It's called the Holy of Holies. So you go to Egypt and you'll see the Holy of Holies, in the temples of Edfu or in Memphis.
I was just there.
Were you really? Okay, so exactly.
Yeah.
So if that's true, and for those of our viewers that are biblically inclined, our biblical texts tell us that we are a temple. And it actually says in the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 3:16, I believe, it says, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells within you?" Well, that is a metaphor for some people. But now, knowing what we know, if we are a temple of divinity, then, and it's not about religion, but it's deeply spiritual, then we have not one Holy of Holies, but we've got 50 trillion Holy of Holies. Because the nucleus of every cell is the Holy of Holies that holds the DNA of our divinity, the truth of who we are, that tells us who we are. And it's just another way of looking at it for people that are biblically inclined. I think for all of us, knowing what we now know about the human body, perhaps our greatest task of mastery is to protect and preserve the temple, protect and preserve the gift of our humanness so that we can express our divinity in this world. And when we do that freely, fearlessly, we have triumphed over this ancient battle between good and evil. We didn't fight, we simply lived the best version of ourselves. And I think that's the takeaway. When we live the best version of ourselves to the best of our abilities, we're honoring the gift of our humanness, we're living our divinity, and in that way, you triumph in this battle between good and evil. When we succumb to our propensities for greed or for hate, that is when evil triumphs by leading us to become something that we would never want to be in a million years. And I think it's up for all of us right now, Emilio. United States just went through a very difficult election. Technically, it's not over until January. And because of the evil that was expressed through media by leading different people to believe different things, dividing families, dividing communities, dividing society, dividing cultures, it divided the nation in a way that I've never seen. That is a form of evil. And what has happened is that information there are some individuals that have allowed what they have seen and what they've heard to elicit, to drive them to their most primal instincts of hate and revenge and anger, blinding them to the beauty and the possibility of all the good things that are happening in the world, and what it can mean for us to be a family and work together. And America is so blessed. The world is blessed until governments get involved. Because people, for the most part, I've traveled the world for most of my adult life. And what I've found is, for the most part, people know how to get along. People know how to care for one another. People may not always like one another, but I believe they love one another. They may not like the habits of their neighbors, for example, but I've seen time and time again firsthand, and I've also seen reports. Something bad happens and a human sees it, a human, without even a second thought. There's no time for a thought. Their instinctual reaction is to risk their lives to save the life of another human, because that's how deep the love goes. Beautiful example. I mean, not beautiful, but perfect examples. There was a story as U.S. was pulling out of Afghanistan. There was a story of there was an armed personnel carrier. So it's an armored vehicle, and most of the personnel are inside the vehicle, and there's one in a hatch up on top that's out looking around. And one of the enemy had a hand grenade, and they dropped the hand grenade into that vehicle. That guy, they were all men, that guy that was on top, he could have left that vehicle and saved himself in a heartbeat. And without even thinking, he dropped down to use his body to shield the blast and the impact to save the lives of the other 4 men that were below. He lost his life in that process. He had a family, he had a wife, he had kids. And it happened in a flash, in a heartbeat, because if his logical mind had kicked in, he would have said, I'm going to save myself. But there's something deeper within us. We are a benevolent species, and we're a kind and a good species until events elicit something other than that from us. And in our goodness and in our love, we will give our lives to protect another, because we do love them. May not like them, but we love them. And that's just one extreme example. But we hear things like that. When the floods were happening in Europe back in the 90s, you saw people going to the zoos, risking their lives trying to free the animals that were going to drown. The elephants were pinned up in cages, and the water levels were rising, and they were going to drown. And people went to free those animals at their own peril, and some of the people died trying to free the life of another animal. There's a story. There was a man in Texas. He had 10 dogs in his house. His house caught fire, and he was able to get himself and one of his dogs out. And the fireman said the rest is lost, and he refused to accept that. He went back into the house 9 times to seek out and bring out every one of those 9 dogs, and saved all 10 of those when the authorities told him it was impossible. If he had been thinking about that, he would know that he could have lost his life doing that. And for him, there's something much, much deeper. What psychologists tell us is that we are a kind of benevolent species, and that we will betray our goodness under one or some combination of 3 conditions. when we feel personally threatened, when we feel our way of life is threatened, and when we feel our family is threatened, we will drop into our anger or our hate or our warrior mode, because that's what we need to do. And you look at the world and where the problems are, and in most places, all three of those are happening. If we want to end the wars, you help people to feel safe, you help them to feel that their families are safe, and you help them to feel their way of life is safe. And then they become very, very different people. They are no longer in that primal survival mode. So the point of all of this is these are all expressions of human divinity, and love is a very powerful one. And anything that veils or masks or denies our divinity prevents us from those expressions as a form of evil. And so what do you do with that? You live the best version of yourself, and you do it from your love of what you know is possible and your appreciation for the gift of your humanness and of your divinity. And I think that's what we're all being asked to do right now. That makes sense if I say it that way?
Yes. And as I told you, Gregg, we end every show with a segment called the Final Trio, little rapid fire questions at the end.
Oh, should I sit down? This sounds important. I better sit down for this, right? Okay,
this is going to, we got to get a stretch in, buckle in.
Okay.
But before that, I just wanted to let people know where they can connect with you, where they can connect with the newest book that we've been talking about throughout, and any upcoming events that you have going on in the new year. Yeah,
well, thank you for that. Emilio. First, I want to thank you. I am recognized. I did a whole lot of talking, and you did very little in your program. And I just want to recognize that. I want to honor you, and thank you for honoring me and letting me complete the conversations, because these are very nuanced ideas. And if you stop in the middle of a sentence sometimes without that completion, they can be interpreted in ways that are hurtful. So hopefully we haven't said anything that is hurtful or interpreted as hurtful, and I appreciate that. I'm always on the road. We always have ongoing programs. The best thing to do is just go to the website, Gregg Braden, Gregg, 2 G's, Braden, Braden.com. There's 2 G's because my mom gave me 2 G's because I am a Gregg and not a Gregory. So if it's 1 G, it's an abbreviation for a Gregory. And I'm just a plain Gregg, no Gregory here.
Just Gregg.
Just Gregg. Yeah, and you'll see all the live events. I'm speaking with a number of other people, Bruce Lipton, Anita Moorjani, Dr. Sue Mortar, Lynn McTaggart, all over the world, and too much to go into here. And, and I'm not here to sell a book. I'm here to share these ideas. If people want more, there is a book available. It's called Pure Human. It's available for pre-purchase on Amazon or wherever books are sold. And I don't know what languages it's in right now. The publisher hasn't told me that, but it's through Hay House, and much of what we have shared today is in the book. The book goes much deeper and has a lot of content that we didn't share today. So I want people to know that's available as well. So my rapid fire question, my lightning round. I'm ready for my lightning round.
You can take as much time as you need for these questions, but all right. I wanted to be mindful of the time. The first question I had for you, the first 2 are personalized to the guest, and the last one we ask at the end of every show. So the first one is, when was the last time you transcended a perceived limitation?
I'm going to answer that in a way that probably is different from some. And I've also been asked what was the last mistake that I made and whether or not that was a limitation. I've learned to look at my life. I don't think I've made mistakes. I think that I have done the absolute best I can do when I commit myself to doing something. And if I've done the best and I can't do anything else, that's all I can do. If it doesn't turn out the way I expected, I have to embrace the outcome. Rarely, I really don't think in terms of mistakes. Limitations, I don't think in terms of limitations either. I recognize my relationship with the world around me. And I do my best to do my best to enhance that relationship. And if there is something that I attempt to achieve and it's not possible in this moment, I don't see it as a limitation. I see it as a growth opportunity, but I don't think in terms of limits. So I don't know if that's the answer that to that question, but if I think in terms of limits psychologically, it becomes a barrier to me. And I guess if you're asking the last time that happened, many of your viewers know me and know that I'm a product of a very dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic family. And when you're in those situations, the abuser usually is very demeaning to those around. In this case, it was my father. So he was demeaning to those around him to elevate his sense of worth. So I was raised in an environment where I was always told the things I couldn't do. The flip side, and I think this is just, I'm really blessed, is that I was born into this world with a strong soul compass. And I never succumbed to peer pressure. It didn't bother me. I was a kid in the 60s with all the drugs that were available, and I never succumbed to the pressure from my friends to experiment because I knew it wasn't good for me, and I loved my body too much to do that. And I never believed the limitations that my father, and in some cases even my mom, for the most part, she was very supportive. There were things she told me that I couldn't do or that I shouldn't do. Those were their opinions. I respect their opinions, but they didn't apply to me. And so I never accepted their ideas of limitations. When I wanted to go for something, I've always believed that we come into this world with everything we need for everything we need. And it's a matter of recognizing and developing what may be latent abilities. And so I've never really thought in terms of those limitations.
Beautiful. And that's just wrapping up the definition of divinity, which is transcending perceived limitations.
You know, I never thought of that, but that's exactly what I never thought of it in that way. Thank you for that, Emilio. Wow.
So in that context, when was the last time you accessed your divinity?
Every day, every moment of every day. I'm doing it right now. I'm doing it right now because you've given me the opportunity to love my world, to love my community, and love my audience. I love this world so much. I love the people of this world. We're going through a tough time. And work, the day my father, he finally left when I was 10. And it was a joyous time for me when he walked out the door. It was a frightening time for my mom because she was faced with raising 2 boys on her own, no job. We were more than poor. We lived in government subsidized housing, low income government subsidized housing, high in crime, high in drugs. It was a dangerous place, a violent community, a lot of assaults, fights, and things like that. My mom, in her wisdom, the day my father walked out the door, she gave me a book at 10 years old. And she goes, I don't know what's going to happen in your life, but I think this book is going to help. And some of your viewers are old enough probably to know this book. It's called The Prophet by a man named Khalil Gibran. He was a deeply spiritual Lebanese poet in the 1920s, in the 20th century. And each chapter is like a page or 2 pages long with deep wisdom to help us make it through our everyday lives. And of all of the pages I read in that book, there was one phrase that stood out with me then and has defined my life since that time. And he simply said, work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. I was born in a rural community, northern Missouri. Most people hated what they did for a living. They did the minimal to get by. And what I learned early on is if I say yes to something, I'm in 1,000,000%. And I'm going to do the best I can do. That is my love made visible. So conversations like this, words are important. And through the sharing of what I've come to understand about where we are in the world and what's happening in the world, it's one of the ways that I love my global family. I love my community. We're going to get through this, and we're going to get through it together. The question is, what do we become on the other side? And knowledge is power. And by understanding what's possible, I think it empowers us to come in with maybe a softer landing and take some of the rough edges off, and have a joyous landing as we go through this time of change.
Brother, you have a huge heart, and it's such an honor to witness other men that are leading in that way. The second question I had on the rapid fire round, even though we can take the next 5 hours,
no, I'll be quick.
Going through this. I would love to. What is one essence of humanity that is most worth preserving?
I think it's our goodness. What I described earlier. We are a good and benevolent species. We do love. We are a species of capable of deep love. From mid-1990s till late 2000s, I was blessed to lead groups into Tibet. It's closed now. We can't take those groups in, but we used to go 26 days, 12 monasteries, 2 nunneries, over 26 days, up over 18,000 feet above sea level. And it took time to acclimate to get there. And it was in the monasteries through the translators that we got to speak with the monks and the nuns about what they had learned in their lives. And one of those conversations, it's one of those, it happened quickly and it was so profound. And it was the abbot of one of the monasteries. What he said was essentially through the translator, he said, we all hurt. We all have hurt in our lives. But the deeper the hurt we experience, the greater our capacity for love must be discovered to transcend that hurt. So when we experience the kind of hurt and the kind of loss that we've all come through, everyone has lost something. A lot of people have lost loved ones through the pandemic, certainly. And even if you didn't lose a loved one, everyone has lost a way of life. We've all lost freedoms. We've all lost ways of life. And we've never been given the opportunity to mourn those losses as a society. We're just told to, suck it up and move on. We don't really acknowledge and mourn those losses. And what I know from that is that our world is hurting. And we can look at the opportunity of that hurt. Wherever that hurt takes us, we've got to find a love that goes even deeper than that hurt so that we can rise up and capture that hurt and elevate and transcend it into something good and beautiful and positive in our lives. So the deeper we hurt, the greater our loss. That tells us that we're being tapped. We are being tapped to find a deeper love within ourselves. And for reasons I can't get into right now, what the science tells us, I can show you mathematically and I can show you psychologically. Any challenge that comes into our lives is only possible. It's only possible for us to open the door to those challenges because we already have everything we need to meet that challenge. Any hurt that we are faced with tells us that somewhere within us, we already have the capacity to love that hurt into something good and beautiful so that we can transcend it in a healthy way. It's our choice. Do we want to stay stuck in the hurt that steals from us the very essence of our love? and our forgiveness and creativity and imagination, because hurt is a numbing effect if it's unresolved. Everybody hurts. The key is, are we willing to embrace the love that will allow us to resolve our hurt? And that's up for everybody right now as well. So anyone who is hurting right now, first, my love goes to you for your experience and your loss. And I want you to know that the only reason that you're facing what you're facing right now is because you have everything you need, not just to get through it, but to become more than that hurt. And when you do, you are a better person, and you awaken sensitivities and capacities and a deep confidence within yourself that allows you to move forward in the world, look in the world square on in the eye, and loving yourself so that you can be present to serve for those that you love, friends, family, community, whatever that means. In the new strength that you find from transcending that hurt, you become a deeper service for those that you love. Does that make sense? Nobody's asked me that question, so I'm not sure if I said that in a good way.
Well, I felt that straight in my heart. I wasn't even trying to intellectually process it, but it felt, I know truth by the way that it feels in my heart. So it definitely made sense in here. And
that's from a Cancerian man to another Cancerian man. See, we talk double Cancerian to a Cancerian man. So
we just feel, and we transmit the feeling, and then we get it back. And then the last question that we ask every single guest on this show that comes through here, we call it the time capsule question. It requires us to travel out a little bit into the future, around 10 to 15 years down the line. And the reason I chose out those time frames is because I believe that's going to be a time when the young generations of today will be stepping more into leadership positions around the world. And just like any great leader that has passed, they've had great mentors, great knowledge, great wisdom, great resources and tools that have surrounded them through their life in order for them to be the best leaders and best versions of themselves that they can be. So you are given the opportunity to leave a time capsule behind for these next generation of leaders. And within the time capsule, you can include anything that you wanted. It doesn't have to be anything physical necessarily. It could be a vibration, a song. It could be a book, a frequency, anything that you can fathom in this time capsule. It doesn't have to physically fit inside, but knowing that these leaders in 10 to 15 years will open the time capsule and be equipped with the best knowledge, tools, wisdom, and energy to be able to carry out into this new iteration of the earth that we're all co-creating. Hopefully in the golden age timeline where we embrace the most divinity as possible and bring that down to the heaven on earth. What would you include in the time capsule?
Well, you know where I'm going to go, and it's probably the briefest answer of all these three questions. What I would say, it's the same thing. If I came to this world from another world and the mothership said, you've got 2 minutes to say to this world what you want to say, and then you have to get back on the mothership and leave, what would you say? I would invite our young people to embrace the deep truth of their humanness that allows them the gift of their divinity, and to allow that divinity to free them to love fearlessly in this world, because it all comes down to just that, to love. And I would invite them to learn to discern without judgment anything that veils or denies their divinity, so they can recognize without judgment, but they can recognize to transcend what that force is that's attempting to keep them from being the best version of themselves. And I would do it that way, because once we accept our humanness, that opens the doorway. That opens the floodgates to all possibilities, some that we're only beginning to understand. And it all begins with the gift of our humanness. The reason I'm hesitating, and I'll just add one more piece here because we didn't get to it in this conversation. I would invite them that when in the times where they feel lost and they've forgotten who they are, they need look no further than the message that was encoded into the DNA of every cell in their bodies 200,000 years ago when the first human emerged on this earth mysteriously. When we cross the traditional boundaries of chemistry, biology, genetics, linguistics, ancient languages, we put them all together. We follow the instructions in a 3,000-year-old text called the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation. What we discover is there is a literal message in the first layer of DNA of every cell in our bodies. I do talk about in the book, we just didn't get to it in this conversation. A literal message that tells us who we are. And that message literally reads, just like the pages on a book, it reads, God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. It doesn't say who God is or where God comes from, but it tells us that we're not a fluke of lucky biology. We're not an accident of random mutations. We are a gift. Our bodies are a gift. Our divinity is a gift. And the body that carries that gift is a temple to be protected and cherished. And as we go through the challenges that life brings to our doorstep, rather than meeting those challenges from the feeling of a frail, powerless, helpless victim in the world, when we can meet the challenges of life as God eternal within the body, it changes something within us. And in that change, we become the best version of ourselves and we create the best world possible.
And I just want to take a brief moment to acknowledge you, Gregg Braden, for knowing how to access the Holy of Holies within your temple and being able to light the consciousness within yourself and sharing it so freely, so generously, and with such precision and effort. It's truly an inspiring thing to see, especially in the times that we're in where we need more leadership. And I feel like you embody the leadership that the next generations can really look up to because of your diligence, because of the way that you speak from your heart while also maintaining such a clear analytical mind as well. It's a beauty to see. You have a beautiful mind, a beautiful heart, and I hope to just continue this co-creation for many, many years to come. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, my brother. Well, what you don't know is it's really good for me to hear that. It's been a tough couple of weeks. All good, but not always easy. And I really appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you, my spiritual brother, my Cancerian brother. And I want to thank you for all you're doing to create the community that's more important now than ever for people so they have a place, a platform. Everyone learns differently. And that's the beauty of a program like yours. You've got people from many different perspectives that come and they are sharing their bits and pieces that become the building blocks for the understanding of how we can be the best version of ourselves. And that can't happen if you don't do what you do. So I want to thank you for your vision and your dedication and your diligence and your perseverance, and just for being a really good man. And you're a model for those generations as well. So that means we're a good team together. So I look forward to our next. I want to say happy holiday to you and your family and everyone watching. So one of the last interviews I'll do in the year 2024, and I'm honored to be with you, Emilio.
I'm honored as well. My face hurts from smiling, so thank you.
All right.